Skyrim is filled with strange NPCs, but some characters go far beyond strange. These are the people who leave you unsettled the moment you meet them, not always because of how they look, but because of what they say, what they've done, or the disturbing stories surrounding them. And the worst part is, Skyrim rarely presents these characters as obvious monsters. A lot of them blend into the world completely normally at first. Shopkeepers, followers, priests, travellers, people you could walk past dozens of times without realising how disturbing they actually are, until eventually you dig a little deeper and the full picture starts to come together. That's when these NPCs become hard to forget, because some of the most cursed people in Skyrim aren't hiding in caves or ruins. They're standing right in front of you, acting like everything is completely normal. Sebastian Lort is one of the most unsettling NPCs in Skyrim, not because of what he actively does during the game, but because of what's already happened to him by the time you find him. In fact, most players probably don't even remember his name. He isn't tied to a major questline, doesn't appear in a city, and barely has any direct interaction with the player at all. He exists quietly inside Rimrock Burrow, a remote cave on Solstheim most people only visit once before moving on forever. And yet, when you stop and pay attention to his story, Sebastian Lort becomes one of the most disturbing examples of psychological collapse anywhere in Skyrim. Because by the time you arrive at Rimrock Burrow, Sebastian is already gone, not physically, but mentally. The location itself immediately sets the tone. Rimrock Burrow sits in an isolated region on the island of Solstheim, surrounded by cold coastline and bleak terrain that already feels detached from the rest of the island. There's no warmth to the area, no sense of safety or normal life nearby. Even before entering the cave, it feels like the kind of place people only end up in when they're trying to escape something, or when they've already been forgotten. And once you step inside, the atmosphere becomes even heavier. The cave is occupied by Reeklings, but unlike many combat-focused locations in Skyrim, the enemies aren't what leave the strongest impressions here. What matters is the evidence scattered throughout the cave, Sebastian's journals. Through them, you slowly piece together the story of a man whose isolation and fear gradually destroyed him from the inside. At first, Sebastian seems relatively normal. He's stranded, trapped within the cave system and trying to survive, while avoiding the Reeklings surrounding him. That setup alone isn't unusual for Skyrim. Plenty of NPCs end up isolated in dangerous environments. But the longer the journals continue, the more his mental state begins to deteriorate. And that deterioration is what makes him so disturbing, because it feels believable. There's no dramatic curse placed upon him. You watch a human mind slowly collapse under pressure, loneliness, fear, and confinement. The entries become increasingly paranoid, desperate, fragmented. His thoughts start looping in circles. Rationality breaks down, survival stops being about escape, and starts becoming about enduring another day trapped inside the nightmare. That gradual unraveling is what makes Sebastian different from many other disturbing NPCs in Skyrim. Characters tied to Daedric princes or dark magic often feel larger than life, exaggerated by fantasy elements that create some distance between the player and the horror. Sebastian Lort is disturbing because he sits directly in that space, but in a much quieter and uglier way than most Daedric characters in Skyrim. He isn't some grand cult leader surrounded by followers, and he isn't performing dramatic rituals in a giant ruin somewhere beneath Skyrim. Instead, he's a paranoid, broken man hiding in a frozen cave at the edge of Solstheim after becoming entangled with Clavicus Vile. And the deeper you look into his story, the worse it becomes. Sebastian isn't just another random NPC tied loosely to a Daedric quest. He's one of the targets connected to a Daedra's best friend. And his entire situation reflects the kind of destruction Clavicus Vile leaves behind. By the time the player hears about him, Sebastian has already isolated himself inside Rimrock Burrow, terrified and unstable, convinced everyone around him is trying to kill him. And considering what he's done, that paranoia starts to make horrifying sense. Because Sebastian Lort killed his own daughter. That single detail completely changes the tone of this character. Up until that revelation, he can almost seem pathetic, a frightened man hiding from imagined threats inside a cave full of enemies. But the truth underneath that fear is much darker. Sebastian isn't just hiding from danger, he's hiding from the consequences of his own actions. And that's where the connection to Clavicus Vile becomes so disturbing. Vile's influence in Skyrim almost always revolves around twisted bargains, selfishness, and desires turning poisonous over time. Sebastian fits perfectly into that pattern. He's consumed by fear, by greed, and suspicion to the point that he destroys the people closest to him. The murder of his daughter doesn't feel like a dramatic fantasy event. It feels personal and deeply wrong in a grounded, ugly way that lingers far longer than most Daedric stories. Because there's no spectacle to it, no ritual, no supernatural transformation, just a father killing his own child, and then hiding away in a cave while his mind slowly collapses under the weight of what he's done. That completely changes how Rimrock Burrow feels as a location. The cave stops feeling like a prison Sebastian was trapped in against his will, and starts feeling more like a self-imposed exile. He isn't simply stranded there, he's retreated there, buried himself at the edge of the world alongside Reeklings and isolation, because there's literally nowhere else left for him to go. And that creates a very different kind of horror, because now the paranoia in his journals feels less tragic and more corrupted. You start to realize that his fear isn't entirely irrational. He should be afraid. He's become the kind of person who destroyed his own family and then fled into isolation rather than face the aftermath. That tension between pity and disgust is what makes Sebastian such an effective, disturbing NPC. Part of you can still see the broken man trapped inside the cave, slowly unraveling mentally, but another part of you understands that his suffering didn't come from nowhere. It came from choices, from selfishness and moral collapse amplified by Daedric influence. And Clavicus Vile's presence hangs over the entire story, even when he isn't physically there. That's what makes Daedric corruption in Skyrim so effective sometimes. It doesn't always turn people into monsters. Sometimes it simply pushes existing flaws to catastrophic extremes. Sebastian doesn't become a towering villain or supernatural creature. He becomes something quieter and arguably more disturbing. A guilty man consumed by fear and isolation after crossing a line he can never uncross. The Reeklings surrounding him almost become symbolic at that point. Primitive, chaotic creatures living in filth and isolation, while Sebastian slowly degrades mentally among them. The longer he stays in Rimrock Burrow, the more disconnected he becomes from normal human life, until the cave itself starts to feel like an extension of his guilt and paranoia. And unlike many Daedric Quest characters, Sebastian never gets a really dramatic ending. No redemption, no confrontation, no emotional resolution. He's simply another ruined person left behind by Clavicus Vile's influence, forgotten at the edge of Solstheim while the rest of the world moves on without him. Clavicus Vile's role in the story is what pushes it from tragic into genuinely disturbing, because it perfectly captures the kind of manipulation that defines him as a Daedric prince. Vile never forces people into evil directly. He offers solutions, shortcuts, bargains that seem reasonable in moments of desperation, only for those bargains to destroy lives once the consequences fully unfold. In Sebastian's case, that manipulation becomes horrifyingly personal. When Sebastian's daughter became a werewolf, he turned to Vile for help, and Vile's answer was the rueful axe. Not a cure, not mercy, and execution. Sebastian was told to kill his own daughter with the axe, transforming what should have been a father trying to save his child into something twisted and irreversible. And that's what makes Vile so disturbing here. He understands exactly how to corrupt people emotionally. He takes fear and desperation and reshapes them into violence, while making the victim believe they're solving the problem. That's the real horror behind the story. Not just that Sebastian killed his daughter, but that Clavicus Vile convinced him it was the correct thing to do. And once that act was committed, there was no undoing it, No recovery, just guilt, paranoia, and isolation, slowly consuming what remained of Sebastian's mind. That's what ultimately makes him one of the most cursed NPCs in Skyrim. Not because he's powerful, not because he's visually horrifying, but because his story feels painfully human underneath the fantasy elements. A father corrupted by fear and selfishness. A murderer hiding from the consequences of his actions. A man so consumed by paranoia and guilt that he buried himself alive in one frozen cave at the edge of the world. And by the time the player finally reaches him, there's barely anything left except the remnants of a mind collapsing under the weight of what it became. Sybil Stentor is one of the most disturbing NPCs in Skyrim because unlike many of the game's darker characters, she isn't hidden away in a cave, buried inside a ruin, or isolated from society. She lives openly in Solitude, the capital of Skyrim, standing at the centre of one of the most powerful courts in the province. And almost nobody around her seems to fully understand how unnatural that really is. That contrast is what makes her so unsettling. Skyrim is filled with vampires, necromancers, cultists, and murderers, but most of them exist on the fringes of civilization. Stentor doesn't. She exists right in the middle of it, calmly, comfortably, almost invisibly. And the longer you spend around her, the more disturbing that becomes. At first glance, she doesn't immediately stand out. She appears composed, intelligent, and controlled. That actually fits into Solitude's atmosphere perfectly. The Blue Palace is full of political tension, grief over High King Toryg's death, and quiet power struggles beneath polished surfaces. Compared to the louder personalities around her, Stentor almost feels restrained. But then she starts speaking, and suddenly the tone changes. Her dialogue is some of the coldest in the entire game. She casually discusses death, undeath, and destruction, with a level of comfort that immediately feels wrong compared to everyone else in Solitude. There's no hesitation or secrecy behind it either. Most disturbing NPCs in Skyrim hide what they are until the player uncovers it gradually. She practically tells you outright that something is deeply wrong with her. And yet somehow, she remains in power. That's what makes her so unnerving. Stentor is a vampire serving directly within the Court of Solitude, advising the Jarl while openly displaying fascination with dark magic and necromancy. In almost any other setting in Skyrim, someone like her would be treated as an immediate threat. But in Solitude, she's normalized, accepted, protected by her position and intelligence. That normalization is what creates the discomfort, because it means she has integrated herself so completely into human society that most people either don't notice what she is or choose not to acknowledge it. And when you really think about that, it becomes terrifying. Solitude is supposed to represent order, civilization, and stability within Skyrim. It's the centre of the imperial influence in the province, filled with guards, nobles, and political authority. The Blue Palace itself symbolises structure and control. Yet hidden within that environment is a centuries-old vampire quietly influencing events from the shadows. Not through violence, not through fear, but through patience. That patience is one of the most disturbing aspects of her character. Stentor doesn't behave like someone constantly struggling to conceal a monstrous nature. She behaves like someone completely confident in her place within the world. She's calm because she's already won. She has power, protection, influence, and access to the highest levels of political authority in Skyrim. And nobody can really challenge her. Even the way other NPCs speak about her contributes to this unsettling feeling. There's an underlying awareness that Stentor is strange, intimidating, and deeply dangerous. But it rarely goes beyond vague discomfort. Court members tolerate her because she's useful, powerful, knowledgeable. The court wizard role already carries suspicion in Skyrim, but Stentor pushes that archetype into something much darker. Because unlike most court wizards, she genuinely is dangerous in a way people barely comprehend. Her fascination with necromancy reinforces this constantly. She speaks about raising the dead and manipulating life with casual enthusiasm, treating subjects that horrify most people as intellectual interests rather than moral boundaries. And what makes that especially disturbing is how detached she sounds while discussing them. There's no passion, no madness, no dramatic villainous energy, just calm curiosity. That emotional detachment is what makes her feel so inhuman compared to many other dark NPCs in Skyrim. Characters like Cicero or Calixto feel unstable, emotionally driven by obsession or madness. Stentor feels controlled to the point of emotional absence. She doesn't need to lash out or lose control, because she's already operating from a position far above ordinary people. That superiority quietly hangs over every interaction with her, and the vampire aspect only deepens it further. Unlike feral vampires hidden in caves, Stentor represents the terrifying idea of a vampire fully integrated into civilization. She feeds suspicion without ever fully confirming it publicly. She exists in plain sight while remaining just distant enough from everyone around her to avoid scrutiny. That ability to blend in makes her far more unsettling than openly monstrous vampires elsewhere in Skyrim, because she doesn't feel separate from society. She feels embedded within it. And there's also the question of how long she's been there. Stentor heavily implies she has served Solitude for an extremely long time, potentially across multiple generations of rulers. That detail changes the scale of her character completely. Suddenly she stops feeling like a strange court mage and starts feeling like a permanent presence within the city itself, watching, advising, outlasting everyone around her. That longevity creates a disturbing imbalance between her and the mortal characters surrounding her. The Jarls and nobles and guards of Solitude all live temporary lives compared to her existence. Political conflicts rise and fall, rulers die, wars begin and end, but Stentor remains unchanged. And that permanence makes her feel almost parasitic in relation to the court. Not because she's overtly harming Solitude, but because she exists outside the normal human cycle, while quietly benefiting from it. She gains influence simply by surviving long enough for everyone else to disappear around her. That idea becomes even more unsettling when you consider how little anyone truly knows about her. Players uncover fragments, her vampirism, her necromantic interests, hints about her age, but the full extent of her history remains unclear. Skyrim never fully explains where she came from, what she's done over the centuries, or how many events she may have quietly influenced from behind the scenes. And that uncertainty works perfectly for her character, because Stentor feels like someone who should have far more hidden beneath the surface than the game ever explicitly reveals. And that's exactly why the rumours surrounding her become so disturbing once players start piecing them together. One of the darkest theories tied to her involves the prisoners kept within Solitude. Throughout Skyrim, vampires are constantly known for needing regular sources of blood to survive, without losing control. That immediately raises the question, how? And the answer many players arrive at is deeply unsettling. Solitude has a prison directly beneath the city, filled with criminals, political enemies, and forgotten prisoners that very few people would notice disappear. Stentor herself even has dialogue expressing unusual interest in the prison and the people inside it, which suddenly takes on a much darker meaning once you know she's a vampire. That implication isn't outrightly confirmed, but Skyrim leaves just enough space for the theory to feel believable. That Stentor quietly feeds on prisoners beneath Solitude while maintaining her position in the court above. And honestly, it fits her character perfectly, because it reflects the same calm, controlled efficiency that defines everything else about her. No reckless attacks, no bodies left in the streets, just isolated people beneath the city slowly becoming part of the system keeping her alive. That possibility makes her even more disturbing because it transforms Solitude itself. The shining capital of Skyrim suddenly gains this hidden layer beneath it. A vampire quietly feeding below the palace while nobles and guards continue their daily lives completely unaware. And the game never fully confirms or denies it, which somehow makes the idea even worse. Even visually, she stands apart from the rest of Solitude in subtle ways. While the court around her reflects nobility and political structure, Stentor's appearance and demeanour carries a cold, darker tone. She doesn't quite fit the environment emotionally, yet somehow she remains completely accepted within it. That contradiction is central to why she feels cursed as an NPC. She belongs and doesn't belong at the same time. A creature associated with death and predation, calmly operating inside the most civilized city in Skyrim. And unlike many cursed characters in the game, there's no downfall really waiting for her. No tragic collapse, no exposure, no dramatic punishment. She simply continues existing. That lack of resolution makes her even more unsettling because it suggests she's too established to remove, too deeply rooted within Solitude's structure for anyone to truly challenge her presence. Compared to other disturbing NPCs in Skyrim, Stentor represents a very different kind of horror. Sebastian Lort shows what Daedric corruption can do to a broken individual. Calixto represents hidden monstrosity lurking beneath ordinary life. Cybele Stentor represents something colder, power hidden behind normalcy. A predator so patient and intelligent that society eventually stopped seeing her as a threat at all. And that's what ultimately makes her one of the most cursed and disturbing NPCs in Skyrim. Not because she's the most violent, not because she's the most openly evil, but because she proves something deeply uncomfortable about Skyrim's world. The most dangerous people aren't always hiding in ruins or caves. Sometimes they're standing calmly in royal courts, surrounded by guards and nobles, speaking softly while everyone around them forgets to question what they really are. And Stentor understands that better than anyone, which is exactly why she's so terrifying. Lemkill is one of the most quietly disturbing NPCs in Skyrim, because unlike many of the game's darker characters, there's no dramatic reveal attached to him. He isn't a vampire hiding in plain sight, a cultist worshipping a Daedric prince, or a murderer waiting for the player to uncover his crimes. In fact, if you pass through Roekstead quickly, he barely stands out at all. He's just another farmer in another small settlement working the land and complaining about life like countless other NPCs across Skyrim. But the longer you stay around him, and more importantly, the more you listen to the people around him, the more unsettling he becomes. Because Lemkill represents a very different kind of darkness in Skyrim, one that feels uncomfortably real. That disturbing feeling starts with his daughters. On the surface, they seem like typical children NPCs, but almost immediately their conversations reveal something deeply wrong inside the household. One of them is aggressive, cruel, and openly hostile towards her younger sister. Sissel, meanwhile, is quiet, frightened, withdrawn, and constantly trying to avoid conflict. At first, it can seem like simple sibling tension, but then you hear the dialogue, the insults, the fear in Sissel's voice, the way her older sister repeats behaviour that clearly came from somewhere else. And slowly it becomes obvious that the real problem in the house isn't the children, it's Lemkill. Multiple pieces of dialogue strongly imply that Lemkill abuses his daughters, especially Sissel. He openly insults her, dismisses her, and treats her as a burden rather than a child. The atmosphere around the family feels tense in a way very few homes in Skyrim do. Most NPC households, even poor or struggling ones, still have a sense of normal routine or warmth. Lemkill's house doesn't. It feels hostile, cold, like the children inside it are constantly trying to avoid setting something off. And that subtlety is what makes the situation so disturbing. Skyrim never directly stops the player and explains what's happening. There's no dramatic questline exposing Lemkill as an abuser. Instead, the game trusts the player to notice the details themselves. Sissel flinching emotionally around her father, her older sister behaving aggressively because she's learned that behaviour somewhere. Lemkill speaking about his daughters with bitterness and resentment instead of care. It all builds gradually into one of the darkest family situations anywhere in Skyrim. And the fact that it happens in Roekstead specifically makes it even worse, because Roekstead already carries an unsettling atmosphere beneath its peaceful appearance. The town looks calm on the surface, golden fields, open skies, quiet farmland. But the deeper lore surrounding it suggests something deeply wrong hidden underneath. Strange crop fertility, suspicious dialogue, theories involving Daedric influence and sacrifice. There's already a sense that the town's happiness feels artificial somehow. Lemkill fits into that atmosphere perfectly. He looks like a normal farmer, but something underneath the surface is rotten. And unlike many disturbing NPCs in Skyrim, Lemkill's horror comes entirely from ordinary behaviour. There's no magic involved, no supernatural transformation, no hidden dungeon beneath his house. Just cruelty embedded into daily life so completely that it's become normalised inside the household. That normalcy is what makes him so hard to forget once you notice it, because it feels believable. Skyrim is full of fantasy horrors, dragons, necromancers, vampires, but Lemkill represents something far more grounded and emotionally uncomfortable. A parent who resents his child, a household built around fear, two girls growing up in an environment that's clearly damaging them in completely different ways. And the game never offers a clean solution to it. That's another reason he feels so cursed as an NPC. You can't truly fix the situation. Sissel remains trapped there unless the player deliberately intervenes through very specific actions, such as adopting her after Lemkill dies. Otherwise, the cycle simply continues. Her older sister grows more hostile, Sissel grows more withdrawn, Lemkill keeps treating them with cold resentment, while the rest of Roekstead quietly ignores it. That last part is especially disturbing, because nobody in town really steps in. The abuse exists openly enough that players can recognise it almost immediately through dialogue, yet the world around the family treats it as background noise. And that creates a feeling that the toxicity inside the house has become normalised within the community itself, which ties back into why Roekstead feels so unsettling overall. The town constantly gives the impression that people ignore uncomfortable truths, as long as life on the surface continues functioning normally. And Lemkill becomes one of the clearest examples of that. Even his name contributes to the discomfort once players realise what it likely means. Rearranged, Lemkill becomes the phrase "kill me," one of the most infamous hidden details in Skyrim. Whether intentional or not, the implication surrounding a character tied so heavily to emotional abuse creates an incredibly dark undertone around him, especially when connected to Sissel, because Sissel is one of the few genuinely kind and hopeful children in Skyrim despite everything happening around her. She dreams of Pathurnax and dragons, showing signs of magical sensitivity and imagination that set her apart from the rest of the town. In another environment, she might have thrived. Instead, she's trapped in a house where she's treated like a burden. And that contrast makes the situation feel even crueler. It's not dramatic evil, it's not supernatural horror, but the quiet, repetitive kind of cruelty that shapes people over time. Compared to other cursed NPCs in Skyrim, Lemkill stands apart because there's no mystery to uncover beyond the emotional reality of the situation. Characters like Cybele Stentor or Sebastian Lort become disturbing through hidden layers and dark revelations. Lemkill becomes disturbing through implication and observation. You notice the way people speak, the tension in conversations, the emotional damage sitting openly inside the house. And once you see it, it becomes impossible to ignore. That subtlety also makes him one of the most realistic, disturbing NPCs in the game. Skyrim usually externalizes horror through fantasy concepts, but Lemkill's story stays painfully grounded. There are no monsters involved. He is the monster. And the game never dramatizes it enough to create emotional distance from that fact. Even the player's ability to solve the problem feels morally uncomfortable. Many players end up killing Lemkill specifically to free Sissel from the household and allow her adoption elsewhere. And while the game technically permits that solution, the fact that murder becomes the cleanest path towards helping a child escape abuse says a lot about how trapped the situation feels. There's no redemption arc waiting for him, no hidden explanation, no tragic misunderstanding. Just a bitter, angry man emotionally destroying the people around him while living quietly inside one of Skyrim's most deceptively peaceful towns. And that's why Lemkill lingers in people's memories once they really pay attention to him, because he represents a kind of darkness Skyrim rarely explores directly. The horrors that exist not in ruins or caves, but inside ordinary homes. A cruelty so normalised that the world around it barely reacts anymore. And somehow that feels more disturbing than almost anything else in the game. In the cold, stone depths of the Falkreath jail, the air hangs heavy with despair. Most prisoners mutter in silence, others curse their captors. But one man sits apart. His voice, calm yet trembling, draws you in before you even see his face. I don't suppose there's a point in keeping it a secret, he tells you, eyes glinting with the faint reflection of torchlight. I am cursed. What follows is not just another encounter with a troubled soul. It's one of the most haunting and morally complex stories in the Elder Scrolls Skyrim. He is not merely another bandit or beast. He is a man torn apart by forces beyond his control, a being trapped between guilt and hunger, humanity and monstrosity. His story, found in the Daedric quest Ill Met by Moonlight, is a chilling reminder that evil in Skyrim is rarely black and white. Some monsters are born, others are made, and some, like this man, are both. When you first meet Sinding, he doesn't roar or threaten, he speaks, and that's what makes him disturbing. He confesses to a murder not out of malice, but because of an uncontrollable transformation. He killed a young girl in Falkreath, and though he begs forgiveness, his words only deepen the horror. His guilt is real, his remorse sincere, and yet the crime remains monstrous. I killed her, he admits quietly, but not by choice. This juxtaposition of predator and penitent sets Sinding apart. In a world filled with power-hungry necromancers, bloodthirsty vampires, and Daedric fanatics, his sin feels disturbingly human. It's the loss of control, the terror of one's own impulses. His story feels less like a villain's monologue and more like a confession, whispered through trembling lips. The horror is not that he is a werewolf, it's that he's a man who knows exactly what he's done and cannot undo it. His condition stems from his dealings with Herson, the Daedric prince of the Hunt. Seeking strength, he took on Herson's gift, lycanthropy, but discovered it to be a curse when his transformations became uncontrollable. Unlike the companions of Whiterun who embrace their bestial side, Sinding represents the darker truth behind Herson's blessing. The gift of the beast blood isn't empowerment, it's submission to a primal god who revels in the hunt. When Sinding describes his affliction, he doesn't sound proud, he sounds terrified. The line between man and beast is gone, erased by the will of a Daedra who sees mortals as prey and playthings. Herson does not punish Sinding for murder, he punishes him for disobedience. The Daedric prince demands respect, not morality, and the werewolf's failure to control his urges become both his sin and his damnation. Sinding's existence thus becomes a study in divine cruelty. He is condemned not just for what he's done, but for daring to resist the power that made him do it. Once Sinding escapes Falkreath jail, the player becomes part of his fate. Herson demands you track him, leading you to Bloated Man's Grotto, a mist-shrouded clearing teeming with hunters. Here lies one of Skyrim's most haunting moral choices. You can side with the hunters and kill Sinding to earn Herson's favour, or you can defend him, helping the cursed man find some semblance of peace. It's a choice with no right answer. If you kill him, you become an executioner of mercy, silencing a man who cannot live with himself. If you spare him, you defy a Daedric prince and let a murderer live, knowing he might kill again. No other quest in Skyrim so perfectly captures the tension between morality and survival. The encounter is not about loot or power, it's about conscience. And either outcome, the question lingers long after the grotto falls silent. Was Sinding a monster pretending to be a human, or a human punished for being monstrous? Sinding's tragedy isn't about the supernatural. It's about what it means to be human. Many of Skyrim's villains, vampires, necromancers, cultists, are easy to hate. because they've surrendered their humanity willingly. Sinding hasn't. He clings to it desperately. That's what makes him so disturbing. He reminds us that the line between good and evil isn't always drawn by gods or Daedra. It's drawn by circumstance. Had Sinding been born in Whiterun or joined the Companions, his lycanthropy might have been hailed as honour. Had he learned control, he might have been a hero. Instead, he became an outcast, defined by one moment of horror that destroyed everything he was. Skyrim is filled with murderers, but few haunt the player the way Sinding does, because his sin feels uncomfortably close to our own capacity for error. When you finally confront Sinding in Bloated Man's Grotto, he appears not as a monster but as a man in tattered clothes. His eyes are filled with sorrow. Yet the moment the moonlight strikes, the transformation begins. Bones snapping, muscles twisting, fur bursting from skin. It's one of Skyrim's most striking visual moments. You're not watching a beast emerge, you're watching a man vanish. The werewolf form, so often portrayed as powerful and majestic, becomes horrifying in this context. The transformation isn't freedom, it's erasure. Sinding ceases to exist the moment the beast awakens. That's the real horror, not the blood or claws, but the obliteration of self. Hersen's curse doesn't just make Sinding dangerous, it makes him disappear entirely. He becomes an echo of himself, condemned to live as both victim and villain, never fully either. Sinding's crime leaves a scar on Falkreath, a city already haunted by death. Known for its massive cemetery and somber tone, Falkreath becomes the perfect stage for his tragedy. The townsfolk whisper about the murder, their fear palpable. The death of a child by the hands of a trusted man doesn't just horrify, it destabilizes. It makes the town question safety, morality, and the thin line separating ordinary life from chaos. Sinding's presence in the jail isn't just narrative flavour, it's atmospheric storytelling. His cell, dimly lit and claustrophobic, becomes a microcosm of Falkreath itself. A place where grief and fear coexist, and where every shadow might hide something best left unseen. After his escape, the city doesn't breathe easier. It lives in denial. The townsfolk never mention him again, but the silence feels intentional, like a wound that everyone chooses to ignore. Sinding's tale is intertwined with Hersen's philosophy, the eternal hunt. To Hersen, every creature has a place, predator or prey. But Sinding defies this order. He refuses to hunt, refuses to embrace the beast, and in doing so, becomes prey to both men and gods. His rebellion gives his story a mythic weight. Sinding is a tragic Prometheus, punished for rejecting divine will. Yet, unlike most Daedric worshippers, he doesn't seek power or immortality. He seeks forgiveness. This defiance transforms him from villain to victim. He stands as proof that the Daedra's gift is never truly a blessing. Hersen's game is endless, and Sinding's suffering ensures it continues. The player too becomes part of the hunt, not as a hero, but as another piece on Hersen's board. Whether you kill Sinding or not, you've played your role. The prince wins either way. Long after the quest ends, Sinding remains one of Skyrim's most quietly unsettling figures. Unlike most Daedric quests, which reward you with a relic or closure, ill met by moonlight lingers. The grotto's stillness, the corpse-strewn ground, and Hersen's cold approval leave a chill that no gold or artifact can dispel. Sinding is disturbing not because he's evil, but because he's tragic. He reminds us that in Skyrim, even good intentions can lead to horror, that mercy and monstrosity often walk hand in hand. And when you next pass through Falkreath, you might glance towards the jail and think of the man who sat there, whispering his confession into the dark. And somewhere deep in the forests of Skyrim, under the pale light of the moon, you might hear the echo of a howl, not of hunger, but of sorrow. Sinding's story is one of the most powerful in the Elder Scrolls. because it dares to blur the boundaries between man and monster. He is cursed, yes, but his real torment is not the fur or fangs, it's memory. He remembers the girl's face, he remembers the blood, he remembers being human, and that is what truly damns him even more. Hurston's curse made him a beast, but guilt made him eternal. He becomes a spirit trapped between worlds, not quite mortal, not quite Daedric, forever haunted by the hunt he tried to refuse. In the end, Sinding is the most disturbing NPC in Skyrim, because he represents something deeper than horror. He embodies the fear that every mortal, every player must face. That the real monsters are not found in caves or crypts. They live within us, waiting for the moon to rise. In the grim and frostbitten world of the Elder Scrolls Skyrim, necromancy is no laughing matter. It is a forbidden art, a manipulation of the sacred balance between life and death. To most, the practice is abhorrent, an act reserved for the darkest corners of Tamriel. Yet in this world of undead horrors, Daedric cults and vampire covens, there exists one figure whose infamy transcends horror and dips into the bizarre: the Paltry Reanimator. Unlike the King of Worms or the powerful necromancers of the College of Winterhold, the Paltry Reanimator's story is not one of ambition, conquest, or the pursuit of forbidden knowledge. It is one of absurdity, a case so strange it borders on parody. And yet it reflects something deeply human about Skyrim's relationship with magic, madness, and meaning. But while other necromancers raise armies of the dead, the Paltry Reanimator chooses to raise chickens. And in that act, Skyrim's dark tone fractures, revealing humour, tragedy, and mystery in equal measure. To understand the legend of the Paltry Reanimator, one must first understand Skyrim's strange relationship with chickens. In most of the province, chickens are sacred, not in a religious sense, but in a cultural one. To harm or steal a chicken is to commit an unforgivable act. Guards will kill over it, bounties will be placed. The killing of a single chicken can unleash more fury than slaying a Jarl's son. So when word spread that a necromancer had not only killed chickens, but reanimated them, Skyrim's people reacted with equal parts of horror and confusion. The Paltry Reanimator, whose real name, if they ever had one, is lost to history, was said to dwell on the outskirts of civilization, practicing forbidden arts in some remote cave or ruin. Unlike most necromancers who filled their lairs with human skeletons and corpses, this one was surrounded by the undead forms of squawking, clucking chickens. An unholy parody of barnyard life. To some, it was a comedy. To others, it was blasphemy. And to a few, particularly those who understood the deeper lore of necromancy, it was something far more unsettling. A sign of madness taken to its logical extreme. But who really was the Paltry Reanimator? There is no questline dedicated to them. Why would there be? There's no journal revealing their thoughts, no official record. And yet players who stumble across necromantic scenes involving reanimated poultry, or find hints of the act scattered through Skyrim's random encounters, inevitably piece together the myth. Some believe the Paltry Reanimator was once an apprentice of Phineas Gester, or another necromancy sympathetic mage from the College of Winterhold. Banished for unethical experimentation, they turned to forbidden research. But unlike others, their ambition was not grand. They were not trying to achieve immortality or to conquer death. Instead, they seemed fascinated by the process itself, the strange interplay of life and energy, of soul and form. But why chickens? Perhaps because chickens are harmless, perhaps because they are plentiful, or perhaps because, to a mind slowly unravelling under the weight of obsession, the difference between a corpse and a carcass becomes literally meaningless. In this way, the Paltry Reanimator represents a curious reflection of Skyrim's darker themes, that in a world where death is constant, even the grotesque can become ordinary. Necromancy in Skyrim is not a simple spell. It is a philosophy. It asks questions that even the divines fear. Was it the soul? Can it be owned, borrowed, or broken? The Poultry Reanimator's particular brand of necromancy turns this philosophy upside down. Rather than confronting death through grandeur or terror, they do so through absurdity. Imagine a ritual circle in a cave, candles burning, runes glowing, soul gems humming with trapped energy. And in the centre, not a fallen warrior or a corpse from a battlefield, but the limp body of a chicken. Then, as the spell takes hold, the chicken jerks upright, glowing with blue necromantic energy. It clucks, walks, perhaps even lays an unholy egg. It's ridiculous, but it's also deeply unsettling, because it reveals how far a human mind can wander when isolation and obsession take hold. To others, chickens are food. To the Poultry Reanimator, they are subjects, companions, and even proof that death can be undone. To understand how truly bizarre the Poultry Reanimator is, one must understand how necromancy is perceived in Skyrim. Unlike in Cyrodiil or Morrowind, where the practice is more openly discussed or integrated into culture, Skyrim's people view necromancy with visceral disgust. It is outlawed, shunned, and feared. Most Nords revere death as sacred, the passage to Sovngarde, a warrior's paradise. To disturb the dead is to deny them their eternal reward. Thus, necromancers are treated not just as criminals, but as heretics. That makes the Poultry Reanimator's existence even more absurd. They weren't just defying divine law, they were defiling it for poultry. The sheer absurdity of the act made them infamous. The Poultry Reanimator wasn't terrifying like the vampires of Movarth's lair, or tragic like Sinding the werewolf. They were something else entirely, a living joke that nonetheless carried the moral weight of blasphemy. This tale seems uniquely bizarre, and yet Skyrim is a land built on countless such strangeness. It's a world where sorrow, mystery, and absurdity constantly intertwine. For every grand fortress and noble tomb, there exists some lonely clearing or forgotten camp where small human tragedies unfold unseen. One of the most quietly haunting of these is Dead Lovers Camp, a remote campsite hidden in the wilderness, where two corpses lie side by side among empty bottles and cold ashes. I've already done a video on it, but there is no quest tied to it, no dialogue, no explanation. The scene simply exists frozen in time. Were they lovers who chose death together, victims of an attack? The game never really tells you unless you dig deeper. In this way, the Poultry Reanimator and Dead Lovers Camp share a strange kinship. Both are tiny stories that whisper something immense. Both transform Skyrim's wilderness into a stage for unspoken tragedy. And both, though utterly different in tone, one absurd, one melancholy, illustrate Bethesda's fascination with the human side of its world. The Poultry Reanimator's chickens, animated by necromantic energy, are absurd symbols of defiance against death. The lovers lying together forever are quiet symbols of acceptance. One tries to overcome morality through madness, the other yields to it in sorrow. These two spaces, one filled with dark humour, the other with heartbreaking silence, form two halves of Skyrim's soul. There is almost a poetic symmetry between these two forgotten corners of Skyrim. The Poultry Reanimator stands for defiance in the face of meaningless, the lovers represent surrender to it. The necromancer, through grotesque humour, tries to master death, only to be consumed by it. The lovers, through devotion, embrace death together, and in doing so achieve a strange kind of peace. One is drenched in dark comedy, the other in tragedy, and yet both are distinctly Skyrim, quiet, off the beaten path, and entirely optional. That optionality is part of the magic. You could play Skyrim for hundreds of hours and never encounter either. They exist not to reward or punish the player, but to haunt them, to populate the world with mystery and emotion that feels spontaneous rather than scripted. Together, the Poultry Reanimator's place and Dead Lovers Camp form a kind of emotional compass for the game, one pointing towards madness, the other towards melancholy. Both show that Skyrim's true soul isn't just in dragons or war, it's in the quietest absurdities and its softest heartbreaks. In that way, they elevate the game beyond fantasy. They make it more human. Both are ultimately reflections of the same truth. That in Skyrim, beauty and horror, laughter and grief coexist in the same frozen breath. And perhaps that is what makes the world of Skyrim endure long after its dragons have fallen silent. Its ability to hold both absurdity and sincerity in perfect balance. You never know what waits around the next bend, a corpse clutching a love letter, or a chicken reanimated by dark magic. That uncertainty, that blend of awe and unease is what keeps players exploring. Because somewhere, deep in the snow and silence, Skyrim's strangest stories are still unfolding, and the poultry reanimator and the lovers, though long gone, still whisper through its wilderness. Two tiny echoes of a world that never quite makes sense, but always feels real. Somewhere on the rocks, the blue glow of necromantic light still flickers. A chicken clucks in the darkness, and the laughter of a mad mage echoes faintly through the hills. In that moment, you realise, perhaps madness and genius were never that far apart. Skyrim is a land defined by its extremes, from frozen peaks to burning passions, from ancient dragon cults to rebellious Nords shouting for freedom. And yet, among all these forces, none are quite as divisive as the Thalmor, the golden-clad emiracies of the Dominion. They walk Skyrim's roads with calm arrogance of gods, their voices dripping with disdain, their motives cloaked in the guise of diplomacy. But beneath the veneer of law and order, the Thalmor embody something far darker, the manipulation of faith, the silencing of dissent, and the quiet rewriting of history. They claim to be peacekeepers, they claim to represent progress, yet everywhere they go, ruin and resentment follow. The Thalmor are not just another political faction, they are a mystery, one that defines the uneasy balance of Skyrim's world as well. Their power is immense, their intentions uncertain, and their presence a constant reminder that victory and freedom are not the same thing. This is the curious case of the Thalmor in Skyrim, the golden hand that grips the throat of the North. The Dominion presents itself as a vision of order. Its cities gleam with marble and gold, its people speak of purity, and its envoys wear the most refined armour in Tamriel. To the untrained eye, it appears as civilization perfected, but perfection, as the Thalmor prove, comes at a cost. They rose from the ashes of the Oblivion Crisis, preaching unity among the Altmer, Bosmer, and the Khajiit. Yet the Dominion's unity was founded not on cooperation, but on control. The Thalmor saw themselves as the inheritors of the divine right, not rulers by consent, but by superiority. By the time Skyrim begins, their influence stretches far beyond Somerset. They have infiltrated courts, brokered treaties, and dictated the very terms of Skyrim's civil unrest. And they have done all this under one symbol, the Mask of Peace. Their embassy outside Solitude stands as a perfect metaphor, beautiful, isolated, and heavily guarded. It is diplomacy wrapped in barbed wire, a reminder that their form of peace exists only when others kneel. The Thalmor's most infamous act was not a war, but a decree, the ban on Talos worship. For centuries, the Nords revered Talos, the dragonborn emperor, as a god, one of their own who achieved divinity through might and faith. To the Thalmor, this was heresy. No man, they declared, could ascend to godhood. To them, the very idea was an insult to elven supremacy. When the Great War ended, the White Gold Concordat forced the Empire to outlaw the worship of Talos. Shrines were desecrated, priests were executed, temples were seized. To most Nords, this was not peace, it was humiliation. And yet the Thalmor saw it differently. They understood the psychological wound they had inflicted. By stripping Skyrim of its divine symbol, they divided its people. Imperial loyalists versus Stormcloak rebels, faith versus law. In one move, they achieved what armies could not. They made Skyrim fight itself. That is the Thalmor's true genius. They don't conquer through blades, they conquer through belief. When the player first encounters the Thalmor, they seem civil, arrogant, yes, but composed. They refer to themselves as representatives of the Dominion, travelling to Skyrim to enforce the terms of the Concordat. But follow them and you see something else. You find them on roads escorting prisoners. You hear them interrogating worshippers of Talos. You discover their embassy full of torture chambers, secret dosses, and evidence of political manipulation. They are not diplomats, they are inquisitors. The Thalmor patrol the wilderness, killing anyone they deem a heretic. They wield both magic and authority with equal cruelty. Their words are polished, but their intent is absolute. Obedience through fear. To most Nords, they are foreign tyrants walking their land, untouchable and smug. Yet what makes them truly terrifying is that they don't see themselves as villains. In their eyes, they are custodians of order, the only ones enlightened enough to cleanse Tamriel of chaos. This self-righteous certainty makes them unmovable, unmerciful, and utterly convinced that history belongs to them. It's no coincidence that Skyrim's civil war erupted under Thalmor supervision. In fact, it's part of their design. Hidden documents found in the Thalmor embassy reveal the truth. The Dominion considers the war beneficial. They actively monitor and manipulate both the Empire and the Stormcloaks, ensuring neither side gains a decisive advantage. If the Empire wins, Skyrim remains weakened and divided. If Ulfric wins, the province becomes a rebellious, unstable state, one that the Thalmor can eventually crush. Either way, the result is the same: a fractured Skyrim incapable of resisting the Dominion's next move. This manipulation exposes the Thalmor's long game. They don't want immediate victory, they want exhaustion. They want a world so tired of war that it surrenders willingly to the promise of order. Their greatest weapon is not the sword, but patience. Located in the mountains north of Solitude, the Thalmor Embassy is one of the most striking and sinister locations in Skyrim. Its beauty hides cruelty. The polished floors, golden banners, and soft lighting give the illusion of refinement. But beneath the facade lies a dungeon filled with the broken, tortured prisoners, secret documents, and evidence of a foreign power pulling Skyrim's strings. The player's infiltration of the embassy during diplomatic immunity is one of the game's most revealing moments. You uncover dossiers on key figures, Ulfric, Delphine, even yourself. Every influential person in Skyrim is under Thalmor surveillance. What makes the embassy so unnerving isn't its brutality, but its efficiency. Every file, every prisoner, every act of violence is recorded, categorized, and justified. It's bureaucracy weaponized, cruelty with paperwork. This is how the Thalmor maintain control, not through chaos, but through perfect, merciless order. To understand the Thalmor's presence in Skyrim, one must remember that the Great War never truly ended. It simply just changed form. The White Gold Concordat didn't bring peace. It brought a truce built on fear and humiliation. The Thalmor's agents remain embedded in every corner of the Empire, watching, waiting, influencing. Skyrim's civil war, the rise of the Dragonborn, the chaos of dragons, all of it unfolds under the Dominion's gaze. They do not interfere directly, because they do not need to. Every death, every rebellion, every burned village serves their vision. A Tamriel too divided to resist when the Dominion returns in force. In that sense, the Thalmor represent something more than political tyranny. They are inevitability, the cold reminder that power, once taken, never returns willingly. At the core of the Thalmor's ideology lies a simple, terrible belief. The Ultima are destined to rule. To them, man is a mistake, a flawed imitation of the divine. The races of men, born from rebellion and mortality, are reminders of the gods' failures. The Thalmor see themselves as the architects of restoration, to purge the world of human imperfection and restore elven dominion over all creations. This mindset isn't just arrogance, it's theology. The Thalmor genuinely believe that their dominance is righteous, and that makes them uniquely dangerous. You can reason with greed, you can challenge ambition, but you cannot argue with faith. Every word they speak, every law they enforce, every act of cruelty, all of it is justified in their own minds as sacred. That's the paradox of the Thalmor. They commit evil in the name of purity. So what makes the Thalmor such a curious case? It's the contradiction they embody. They are both visible and hidden, lawful yet cruel, civilized yet monstrous. They wear the mask of the god, but behind it lies tyranny. They claim to preserve peace, yet thrive on endless wars. They see themselves as saviors, yet they bring only division. Every empire in Tamriel's history has risen and fallen by the sword, but the Thalmor may be the first to conquer through silence, through treaties, manipulation, and the slow erasure of faith. They are the shadow that falls not at night, but at noon, when the sun shines the brightest. And perhaps that is why Skyrim feels their presence so strongly. The Nords can fight dragons, they can rebel against empires, but they cannot fight an idea, especially one that wears the face of peace. The Thalmor are not just Skyrim's enemies, they are Skyrim's reflection, a mirror of its arrogance, its pride, and its endless struggle between freedom and control. Skyrim is a land defined by its extremes, from frozen peaks to burning passions, from ancient dragon cults to rebellious Nords shouting for freedom. And yet, among all these forces, none are quite as divisive as the Thalmor, the golden-clad emiracies of the Dominion. They walk Skyrim's roads with calm arrogance of gods, their voices dripping with disdain, their motives cloaked in the guise of diplomacy. But beneath the veneer of law and order, the Thalmor embody something far darker, the manipulation of faith, the silencing of dissent, and the quiet rewriting of history. They claim to be peacekeepers, they claim to represent progress, yet everywhere they go, ruin and resentment follow. The Thalmor are not just another political faction, they are a mystery, one that defines the uneasy balance of Skyrim's world as well. Their power is immense, their intentions uncertain, and their presence a constant reminder that victory and freedom are not the same thing. This is the curious case of the Thalmor in Skyrim, the golden hand that grips the throat of the North. The Dominion presents itself as a vision of order. Its cities gleam with marble and gold, its people speak of purity, and its envoys wear the most refined armor in Tamriel. To the untrained eye, it appears as civilization perfected, but perfection, as the Thalmor prove, comes at a cost. They rose from the ashes of the Oblivion Crisis, preaching unity among the Altmer, Bosmer, and the Khajiit. Yet the Dominion's unity was founded not on cooperation, but on control. The Thalmor saw themselves as the inheritors of the divine right, not rulers by consent, but by superiority. By the time Skyrim begins, their influence stretches far beyond Somerset. They have infiltrated courts, brokered treaties, and dictated the very terms of Skyrim's civil unrest. And they have done all this under one symbol, the Mask of Peace. Their embassy outside Solitude stands as a perfect metaphor, beautiful, isolated, and heavily guarded. It is diplomacy wrapped in barbed wire, a reminder that their form of peace exists only when others kneel. The Thalmor's most infamous act was not a war, but a decree, the ban on Talos worship. For centuries, the Nords revered Talos, the dragonborn emperor, as a god, one of their own who achieved divinity through might and faith. To the Thalmor, this was heresy. No man, they declared, could ascend to godhood. To them, the very idea was an insult to elven supremacy. When the Great War ended, the White Gold Concordat forced the Empire to outlaw the worship of Talos. Shrines were desecrated, priests were executed, temples were seized. To most Nords, this was not peace, it was humiliation. And yet the Thalmor saw it differently. They understood the psychological wound they had inflicted. By stripping Skyrim of its divine symbol, they divided its people. Imperial loyalists versus Stormcloak rebels, faith versus law. In one move, they achieved what armies could not. They made Skyrim fight itself. That is the Thalmor's true genius. They don't conquer through blades, they conquer through belief. When the player first encounters the Thalmor, they seem civil, arrogant, yes, but composed. They refer to themselves as representatives of the Dominion, travelling to Skyrim to enforce the terms of the Concordat. But follow them and you see something else. You find them on roads escorting prisoners. You hear them interrogating worshippers of Talos. You discover their embassy full of torture chambers, secret dosses, and evidence of political manipulation. They are not diplomats, they are inquisitors. The Thalmor patrol the wilderness, killing anyone they deem a heretic. They wield both magic and authority with equal cruelty. Their words are polished, but their intent is absolute. Obedience through fear. To most Nords, they are foreign tyrants walking their land, untouchable and smug. Yet what makes them truly terrifying is that they don't see themselves as villains. In their eyes, they are custodians of order, the only ones enlightened enough to cleanse Tamriel of chaos. This self-righteous certainty makes them unmovable, unmerciful, and utterly convinced that history belongs to them. It's no coincidence that Skyrim's civil war erupted under Thalmor supervision. In fact, it's part of their design. Hidden documents found in the Thalmor embassy reveal the truth. The Dominion considers the war beneficial. They actively monitor and manipulate both the Empire and the Stormcloaks, ensuring neither side gains a decisive advantage. If the Empire wins, Skyrim remains weakened and divided. If Ulfric wins, the province becomes a rebellious, unstable state, one that the Thalmor can eventually crush. Either way, the result is the same, a fractured Skyrim incapable of resisting the Dominion's next move. This manipulation exposes the Thalmor's long game. They don't want immediate victory, they want exhaustion. They want a world so tired of war that it surrenders willingly to the promise of order. Their greatest weapon is not the sword, but patience. Located in the mountains north of Solitude, the Thalmor Embassy is one of the most striking and sinister locations in Skyrim. Its beauty hides cruelty. The polished floors, golden banners, and soft lighting give the illusion of refinement. But beneath the facade lies a dungeon filled with the broken, tortured prisoners, secret documents, and evidence of a foreign power pulling Skyrim's strings. The player's infiltration of the embassy during diplomatic immunity is one of the game's most revealing moments. You uncover dossiers on key figures, Ulfric, Delphine, even yourself. Every influential person in Skyrim is under Thalmor surveillance. What makes the embassy so unnerving isn't its brutality, but its efficiency. Every file, every prisoner, every act of violence is recorded, categorized, and justified. It's bureaucracy weaponized, cruelty with paperwork. This is how the Thalmor maintain control, not through chaos, but through perfect, merciless order. To understand the Thalmor's presence in Skyrim, one must remember that the Great War never truly ended. It simply just changed form. The White Gold Concordat didn't bring peace. It brought a truce built on fear and humiliation. The Thalmor's agents remain embedded in every corner of the Empire, watching, waiting, influencing. Skyrim's civil war, the rise of the Dragonborn, the chaos of dragons, all of it unfolds under the Dominion's gaze. They do not interfere directly, because they do not need to. Every death, every rebellion, every burned village serves their vision. A Tamriel too divided to resist when the Dominion returns in force. In that sense, the Thalmor represent something more than political tyranny. They are inevitability, the cold reminder that power, once taken, never returns willingly. At the core of the Thalmor's ideology lies a simple, terrible belief. The Altmer are destined to rule. To them, man is a mistake, a flawed imitation of the divine. The races of men, born from rebellion and mortality, are reminders of the gods' failures. The Thalmor see themselves as the architects of restoration, to purge the world of human imperfection and restore elven dominion over all creations. This mindset isn't just arrogance, it's theology. The Thalmor genuinely believe that their dominance is righteous, and that makes them uniquely dangerous. You can reason with greed, you can challenge ambition, but you cannot argue with faith. Every word they speak, every law they enforce, every act of cruelty, all of it is justified in their own minds as sacred. That's the paradox of the Thalmor. They commit evil in the name of purity. So what makes the Thalmor such a curious case? It's the contradiction they embody. They are both visible and hidden, lawful yet cruel, civilized yet monstrous. They wear the mask of the god, but behind it lies tyranny. They claim to preserve peace, yet thrive on endless wars. They see themselves as saviors, yet they bring only division. Every empire in Tamriel's history has risen and fallen by the sword, but the Thalmor may be the first to conquer through silence, through treaties, manipulation, and the slow erasure of faith. They are the shadow that falls not at night, but at noon, when the sun shines the brightest. And perhaps that is why Skyrim feels their presence so strongly. The Nords can fight dragons, they can rebel against empires, but they cannot fight an idea, especially one that wears the face of peace. The Thalmor are not just Skyrim's enemies, they are Skyrim's reflection, a mirror of its arrogance, its pride, and its endless struggle between freedom and control. Skyrim is a world built on discovery. You explore caves, ruins, forgotten towers, always expecting treasure, enemies, or maybe a bit of lore along the way. Most of the time, you know what you're walking into, but sometimes you don't. Sometimes you find something that doesn't fit, something that isn't just dangerous, but unsettling in a way that lingers long after you've left. A scene that tells a story without saying anything. A place that feels wrong even when it's quiet. Discoveries that make you stop not because of what you have to fight, but because of what you're looking at. And the thing is, Skyrim never announces these moments. You just stumble into them. A hidden room, a journal left behind, a detail that doesn't make sense at first, until it does. And when it does, it changes how you see the place entirely. These aren't the biggest locations, they're not the most important, but they are the ones that stick with you, because they show a different side of Skyrim, one that isn't about adventure or heroism, but something much darker and much quieter, and far harder to forget. Windhelm already feels cold the moment you set foot in the city, and not just because of the snow. It's a city built on tension, political, cultural, social, and that tension gives it a kind of harshness that you don't feel in other major holds. People are divided, conversations are sharp, and there's a constant sense that something is just slightly off beneath the surface. But even within a city like that, the events of Blood on Ice stands out as something different. Not louder, not more dramatic, but more personal, more invasive. Because instead of facing an external threat, you're dealing with something that's already inside the city, hiding in plain sight. The first sign of it is almost easy to miss. A body in the graveyard. It's not presented like a major event. There's no dramatic build-up, no large crowd reacting in shock. It's quiet, contained, almost routine in how it's handled. And that's what makes it so effective, because the lack of reaction doesn't make the situation feel less serious. It makes it feel normalized, like this isn't the first time something like this has happened. And as you start to investigate, that feeling only gets stronger. The killer, eventually revealed, isn't some distant figure operating from the shadows of a dungeon or hidden ruin. He's part of the city. He runs a shop. He speaks to you like any other NPC. There's nothing immediately threatening about him, nothing that signals what he really is. And that's what makes the discovery so unsettling, because it reframes everything. You've walked past him, you've interacted with him, and all the while he's been responsible for something far darker than anything happening outside the city's walls. His motives make it even worse. He isn't killing randomly, he's collecting. harvesting body parts in an attempt to reconstruct someone he's lost, driven by a twisted, obsessive logic that feels disturbingly grounded. It's not about power or chaos or even survival. It's about control, about reshaping life itself in a way that shouldn't be possible. And that's where the quest shifts from being a simple investigation to something far more uncomfortable. Because you're no longer just stopping a murderer, you're uncovering the mindset behind it, the reasoning, the justification. And the more you understand it, the more unsettling it becomes. The clues scattered throughout the quest reinforces this. The journals, the amulet, the hidden room. They don't just point you toward the killer, they built a picture of what's been happening over time. This isn't a sudden event, it's a pattern. A series of actions carried out methodically, repeatedly, without being stopped. And that raises an important question. How did it go unnoticed for so long? Windhelm is a major city. It has guards, leadership, structure, and yet something like this was able to continue within its walls. That suggests a level of neglect or distraction or simply a failure to look closely enough at what's happening internally. Because the city is focused elsewhere, on politics, on division, on everything else happening on the surface. And while all of that attention is directed outward, something far more disturbing is happening quietly in the background. That contrast is what makes Windhelm such an effective setting for this quest. It's already a city defined by conflict, but that conflict is visible, obvious, constantly discussed. The Butcher operates outside of that. He doesn't contribute to the chaos. He exists beneath it, unnoticed because everyone is too focused on something else. And that makes the threat feel more real, because it's not something you can prepare for. It's not something you can see. It's something that exists alongside the normal life, hidden within it. The structure of the quest itself adds to this unease. You're not guided clearly from one step to the next. There's ambiguity, multiple paths, the possibility of false conclusions. You can accuse the wrong person. You can follow leads that seem convincing, but ultimately misdirect you. And that lack of clarity mirrors the nature of the crime itself. Nothing is obvious. Nothing is straightforward. You have to piece it together. And even when you do, there's a lingering sense that you've only uncovered part of it. The house becomes a focal point for all of this. It's not just a location, it's a record. A place where everything comes together, where the evidence isn't just presented, but embedded in the environment. The hidden room, the strange arrangements of items, the notes, it all tells a story without needing to say it directly. And that story is deeply unsettling, because it's quiet. There's no spectacle to it, no dramatic confrontation, just a realization of what's been happening in a space that looks, on the surface, like any other home. That's what makes it stick, the normalcy of it all. The way something so disturbing can exist within something so ordinary. Even after the quest is resolved, that feeling doesn't fully go away. The killer is stopped, the killings end, but the city doesn't fundamentally change. Windhelm remains what it is, a place divided, focused on its own conflicts, moving forward without fully acknowledging what just happened. And that lack of resolution is important, because it suggests that the problem wasn't just the killer, it was the environment that allowed him to operate. A city where attention is divided, where certain things go unnoticed, where something like this can exist without being immediately confronted. That idea lingers because it extends beyond Windhelm. It raises the possibility that similar things could be happening elsewhere, unseen, unaddressed, hidden, within the normal flow of the world. And that's what makes Blood on Ice one of the most disturbing discoveries in Skyrim, and also it makes Windhelm one of the most disturbing places in the entire game. Not because of how violent it is, but because of how quiet it all is. How easily it blends in, how long it continues without being stopped. It doesn't rely on spectacle or scale, it relies on proximity, on the idea that danger isn't out there in some distant ruin or forgotten cave. It's right here, in the middle of the city. When you place the killer alongside other disturbing NPCs in Skyrim, what becomes clear is that he stands apart, not because he's the most powerful or the most openly grotesque, but because of how normal he appears while doing something deeply unnatural. Take someone like Iola, for example. Her involvement in cannibalism is immediately unsettling, but it's also framed within a cult-like setting, tied to Namira and surrounded by others who share her beliefs. There's a structure to it, a clear identity. You know what you're really dealing with. The same goes for someone like Arundel in Jungvild. His obsession with ghosts and control over them is disturbing, but it's also isolated, removed from society, hidden away in a cave where his actions feel contained within his own twisted world. Calixto is different. He doesn't isolate himself, he integrates. That's what makes him harder to place and far more unsettling over time. He lives in a major city, runs a business, speaks casually, and presents himself as harmless. There's no obvious signal that something is wrong. With most disturbing NPCs in Skyrim, there's a build-up, a tone, an environment, a set of clues that prepare you for what you're about to find. With Calixto, that preparation doesn't exist. You meet him the same way you meet anyone else. And that lack of distinction is the problem, because it means the threat isn't separated from normal life. It's embedded within it. Even someone like Cicero, who's unpredictable and mentally unstable, wears his madness openly. You know from the moment you meet him that something is off. His behaviour, his speech, his entire presence signals instability. There's no illusion of normalcy. But Calixto maintains that illusion almost perfectly. He doesn't draw attention to himself, he doesn't stand out in a way that would make you question him immediately. He blends in, and that's what puts him in a different category. Even compared to figures tied to Daedric princes, characters who commit terrible acts under the influence of higher controls, Calixto feels more grounded, and because of that, more disturbing. He isn't being controlled, isn't following divine commands, isn't acting as part of some larger cosmic force. His actions come from his own reasoning, his own obsession, his own decision to cross that line. There's no external excuse, no influence to point to, just intent. That makes his actions feel more personal, more deliberate, and harder to distance from. You can understand the framework of a Daedric cult or a corrupted mage, even if you don't agree with it. But Calixto's logic sits in a different space, one that feels closer to reality, closer to something that doesn't need magic or divine interference to exist. And that's what ultimately sets him apart from the rest. And Windhelm amplifies that feeling in a way no other city really could. This is a place already defined by division, suspicion, and distraction. The tension between Nords and Dunmer, the constant political pressure, the rigid social lines. It all pulls attention outward. People are focused on each other, on visible conflict, on problems they can clearly identify. And in doing so, they miss what's happening right in front of them. Calixto doesn't need to hide particularly well in a city like this. He just needs to exist within it. Windhelm creates the perfect environment for something like him to go unnoticed, not because it lacks structure, but because that structure is pointed in the wrong direction. The city is looking everywhere except where it needs to, and that's what makes the entire situation hit harder. Because it's not just about one man doing something horrific, it's about a place that allowed it to happen. A city so focused on its surface-level conflicts that it failed to see something far worse beneath them. And once you realise that, the unease doesn't stay contained to the quest. It spreads to the city itself, to every street, every building, every normal interaction. Because if something like that could exist there, unnoticed for so long, then how much else have you already walked past without realising? Forelhost doesn't hit you all at once. It settles in slowly, and by the time you understand what you're looking at, it's already too late to see the place as just another dungeon. On the surface, it's a Nordic ruin, one of many scattered across Skyrim, filled with dragger, traps, and the usual signs of ancient burial. You approach it expecting a standard experience, a climb up the mountain, a descent into darkness, a series of encounters that follow a familiar rhythm. And at first, that's exactly what it is. Stone corridors, burial chambers, and the quiet stillness of something long abandoned. But Forelhost isn't just a ruin, it's a record. A preserved moment of something that went very, very wrong. The deeper you go, the more that feeling starts to build, not because of what's attacking you, but because of what's left behind. Notes, bodies, the layout of the place, it all begins to tell a story that doesn't feel distant or mythical. It feels immediate, human. The Journal of Scorm Snowstrider becomes the key to understanding it, and what it reveals reframes everything you've already seen. Forelhost wasn't just a burial site, it was a last stand, a dragon cult stronghold under siege, surrounded by forces determined to wipe it out. And inside, instead of surrendering, the inhabitants made a decision. They chose to die. Not in battle, not as a final act of defiance, but deliberately, systematically, poisoned food, a controlled, intentional end. And that alone is disturbing enough, but it's not really the full picture. Because it wasn't just warriors inside Forelhost, it was families, children. That realization doesn't come immediately, it creeps in. You start to notice smaller details, things that don't fit the image of a military stronghold. The arrangement of bodies, the scale of certain remains, and then it becomes clear. This wasn't just a group of soldiers holding out against an attack. It was a community, a group of people who lived there, who brought their lives into this place, and who all chose or were forced to end those lives together. The presence of child skeletons is what shifts Forelhost from tragic to deeply disturbing, because it removes any distance you might have had from the event. It's no longer about ancient warriors or long-dead cultists. It's about innocence caught inside something it had no control over. Children don't choose siege warfare. They don't choose loyalty to a dragon priest. And yet, they were there. They were part of that final decision. And that raises a question the game never answers directly. Did they actually understand what was happening, or were they just simply included? That ambiguity is what makes it so difficult to process, because there's no clear narrative that softens it, no heroic framing, no sense of sacrifice that feels justified. It's just an ending, quiet, deliberate, and absolute. Even the way it happened adds to the unease. Poison isn't chaotic, it's not immediate in the way a battle is. It's slow, intentional. Something that requires preparation, agreement, or at the very least, compliance. The idea that an entire group of people, including children, went through that process together creates a kind of stillness around the event that's hard to ignore. There was no last charge, no final stand in the traditional sense, just a decision and then silence. The environment of Forelhost reinforces this in subtle ways. Unlike some ruins that feel chaotic or overrun, Forelhost feels preserved. The layout remains intact. The bodies are where they fell. The evidence hasn't been scattered or erased. It's like stepping into a moment that hasn't fully passed. A place where the outcome is already decided, but the weight of it hasn't fully faded. That preservation makes everything feel more immediate, more real. You're not uncovering something that's been lost to time. You're walking through something that still feels present. Even the Draga themselves take on a different tone once you understand the story. They're not just enemies, they're remnants of people who made that choice. People who died not in battle, but by their own hand. Now existing in a state that's neither fully alive nor fully at rest. It adds another layer to the unease, because it suggests that the decision to end their lives didn't bring closure. It extended something, twisted it, left it unresolved. Compared to other disturbing discoveries in Skyrim, this place stands out because of how grounded it feels. There's no Daedric influence driving the events, no external force manipulating the outcome. This wasn't the work of a god or a curse. It was a human decision, a response to pressure, to fear, to the inevitability of defeat. And that's what makes it harder to distance yourself from, because it doesn't rely on fantasy to be unsettling. It relies on choice. When you compare it to something like the Butcher in Windhelm, the difference becomes clear. Calixto's actions are disturbing because of their secrecy, their intrusion into normal life. Forelhost, on the other hand, is disturbing because of its finality. There's no ongoing threat, no mystery to solve. Once you understand what happened, it's already over. All that's left is the aftermath. And that aftermath doesn't offer resolution. It just sits there, waiting to be understood. That's what makes the child's skeletons so impactful. They don't tell you anything directly, they don't come with notes or explanations. They're just there, part of the environment, part of the story, forcing you to make the connection yourself. And once you do, it changes everything. The dungeon isn't just a place to clear, it's a place to process, to think about what happened, why it happened, and what it says about the people who were there. If Foral Host is disturbing because of a shared, deliberate end, then Mara's Eye Den is disturbing for the opposite reason. It's quiet, isolated, and deeply personal in a way that feels almost invasive to uncover. At first glance, Mara's Eye Den doesn't stand out. It's a small cave, easy to overlook, the kind of place you might pass without a second thought. There's no grand entrance, no immediate threat, nothing that signals importance. But like many of Skyrim's most unsettling and disturbing discoveries, it's not about what the place looks like. It's about what it reveals once you step inside. The cave itself is simple, almost bare. A few scattered belongings, signs that someone was living there, but nothing that suggests a thriving presence. It feels temporary, like a place someone retreated to rather than built up. And then you find the journal. That's where everything shifts. The journal tells the story of a man slowly losing himself. Paranoid, isolated, convinced that something is watching him, following him, closing in. At first it reads like fear, like someone overwhelmed by the harshness of Skyrim's wilderness. But as the entries continue, that fear turns into something unstable. His thoughts become fragmented, his reasoning less grounded, his perception of reality more distorted. He isn't just afraid of something out there, he's trapped inside his own mind, unable to separate what's real from what isn't. However, Mara's Eye Den wasn't just empty, it was occupied. Vampires had already taken hold of the cave, and the smugglers either didn't know or didn't care until it was too late. And that's where the story shifts from simple greed to something far more disturbing. This wasn't a planned confrontation, not a battle between equal forces. It was an intrusion into something predatory. The smugglers weren't prepared, weren't equipped to deal with what they found, and the cave itself reflects that outcome. What remains isn't just a failed operation, it's the aftermath of people walking into something they didn't understand and losing. The presence of the vampires changes how the entire space feels. It's no longer just a cave with a story, it's an active threat layered on top of that story. The darkness feels heavier, the silence more deliberate. You're not just uncovering what happened, you're standing in that exact same place, surrounded by the same danger that ended it. And unlike the smugglers, you understand what you're facing. They didn't. That's what makes it unsettling, because their story is simple. They came for gold, and found something that saw them as prey. Compared to Foral Host, where the horror comes from a collective decision and a defined outcome, Mara's Eye Den feels smaller, but more immediate. Foral Host shows what happens when an entire group reaches the same conclusion. Mara's Eye Den shows you what happens when ordinary people stumble into something far beyond their control. One is structured, the other is abrupt. And that contrast makes them work together in ways that highlights two very different kinds of disturbance. Foral Host is overwhelming in its scale, the number of people involved, the children that died, the weight of the decision. It's a place where everything ended at once, where the silence comes from its finality. Mara's Eye Den, on the other hand, feels like something that was interrupted. There's no gradual decline, no long build-up, just a moment where things went wrong and never recovered. But both places leave you with the same lingering effect. They stay with you, not because of what you fight or what you gain, but because of what you understand. Foral Host makes you think about choice and what people are capable of when pushed to the edge, and how far that can extend. Mara's Eye Den makes you think about consequence, about how quickly things can go wrong when you underestimate what's out there, and how little it takes for a simple plan to turn into something fatal. And together they represent two of the most disturbing discoveries in Skyrim, not because they're the most dramatic, but because they feel grounded. One shows you a group choosing an end they believe was necessary. The other show you a group that didn't get a choice at all. and neither one gives you the comfort of a clear resolution, just silence, and the unsettling realization that some of the darkest stories in Skyrim aren't the ones you're told, but the ones you piece together yourself. Throughout Skyrim, the word cursed carries many meanings. Some places are cursed by history, their ruins filled with ghosts and draga. Others are cursed by Daedric influence, where mortals become pawns in games of cruelty. But this place is cursed in every possible sense. On the surface, it seems innocuous, an old abandoned skooma den hidden in the rift, where addicts gather to escape the harshness of life. But as the Dragonborn soon learns, this is no mere den. It is a trap, a place where blood flows as freely as narcotics, and where the unsuspecting are harvested by vampires lurking in the shadows. This place is not cursed because of ancient ruins or divine punishment. It is cursed because it represents the worst of mortal weakness and vampiric cruelty. It is where desperation meets predation, where Skyrim's downtrodden are consumed in both body and soul. At first glance, Redwater Den looks like countless other rundown hideouts scattered across Skyrim. Its entrance is marked by ruin, guarded by two dishevelled sentries who invite passers-by in with the promise of skooma. To the weary traveller or desperate addict, it appears to be nothing more than a place of temporary escape. The first impression is almost pitiful. The skooma addicts inside the front room are hunched, coffee and glassy-eyed. They mutter to themselves, sipping from bottles of Redwater skooma. For the uninitiated, this seems to be nothing more than a forgotten corner of society, a den of vice tucked away where no one of importance will bother to look. But the curse begins here. The addicts believe they are customers, indulging in bliss. But in truth, they are livestock. The Redwater skooma they drink is no ordinary narcotic. It is laced with vampiric alchemy, designed to weaken the body and dull the mind. Each sip pushes them further into dependency and further into the vampire's grasp. This shabby front is the mask of a curse, a lie of escape that conceals the horror beneath. The true heart of Redwater Den lies past a locked gate. Once inside, the tone changes completely. The crumbling skooma den above gives way to a sprawling underground complex, fortified with Dwemer architecture and vampire construction. Here, the addicts are no longer customers, they are prisoners. Cages line the walls filled with weak and trembling mortals. Some mutter incoherently, others claw at the bars in desperation. The skooma they drank has robbed them of strength, and their veins are ripe for harvesting. Vampires stalk the halls like farmers walking their fields. To them, this is not a den, it is a blood farm. The skooma addicts above are funneled down here once their usefulness as customers is exhausted. Every corridor drips with its predatory curse, a reminder that Skyrim's most monstrous vampires are not content with feeding in the shadows. They have created an entire system of exploitation, one as organised and insidious as any mortal trade network. The descent into Redwater Den is a descent into hell itself, a reminder that beneath Skyrim's fragile civilization lurks something far more sinister. At the heart of the den lies the source of its curse, the Redwater Spring. This blood-filled reservoir is a font of unholy power, a well from which the vampires draw both nourishment and strength. It bubbles with crimson liquid, its smell permeating the entire complex. This spring is not natural. It is corrupted, infused with blood and dark magic. To the vampires who run the den, it is a sacred source, a place of ritualistic power. To mortals, it is poison, both physically and spiritually. The Redwater Spring ties the den to Skyrim's long history of vampirism and corruption. It feels less like an isolated feature and more like a cursed scar on the land itself. It does not merely provide sustenance, it demands suffering. Addicts above consume tainted skooma, are funneled below, and their blood is ultimately sacrificed to the spring. Here lies the essence of Redwater Den's curse, a cycle of endless exploitation, where mortal despair feeds vampiric power, and the land itself seems complicit in this horror. While the vampires are the architects of Redwater Den, the curse could not exist without mortal weakness. Addiction is the silent accomplice here, ensuring that the den never runs dry of victims. Skooma, long banned in Skyrim, is nonetheless consumed by the desperate, the broken, and the hopeless. For many, Redwater skooma represents the only escape from pain, poverty, or despair, yet the very thing they consume to numb their suffering ensures their enslavement. The curse of Redwater Den is therefore twofold: the curse of external predation and the curse of internal weakness. Vampires exploit mortals' desire for escape, turning that yearning into chains stronger than steel. Each addict is a tragic figure, not evil, but trapped in a spiral that ends only in death. This blending of addiction with vampirism makes Redwater Den uniquely unsettling. It is not merely about monsters feeding on mortals. It is about mortals unknowingly offering themselves up, bottle by bottle, sip by sip, until nothing remains. Most vampire lairs in Skyrim are crude, a handful of feral predators hiding in caves or ruins, feeding on whatever traveller they can snatch. Redwater Den is different. It is organised, industrialised. The vampires here have built an economy around suffering. They brew and distribute Redwater skooma, lure addicts, imprison them, and drain them for blood. The system is sustainable, efficient, and horrifyingly pragmatic. It is vampirism transformed into a business. This industrial nature of Redwater Den makes it cursed not just in a supernatural sense, but in a societal one as well. It mirrors the darkest aspects of mortal economies, where the weak are consumed to benefit the powerful. The vampires have simply taken it to the most literal and grotesque extreme. Walking through Redwater Den is unsettling not because it is chaotic, but because it is organised. The cages, the guards, the spring, all of it runs like a machine built on the suffering of Skyrim's most vulnerable. One of the most haunting aspects of Redwater Den is the silence of its victims. The addicts mutter, but they do not resist. The prisoners beg faintly, but their voices are weak. There are no riots, no desperate escapes, only submission. This silence is part of the curse as well. It shows how completely the vampires have broken their prey. By the time mortals reach the cages, they are too far gone to fight. Their spirits are extinguished, leaving only husks, waiting to be drained. This silence is worse than screams. It lingers with the player, making Redwater Den feel more tragic than any bandit hideout or vampire lair. The enemies here are not just the predators. It is the despair of those already consumed. Redwater Den's location is no accident. The Rift, with its forests and valleys, is also the centre of Skyrim's corruption. Riften itself is ruled by Maven Blackbriar, a woman whose wealth is built on exploitation and crime. The Thieves' Guild fester in its sewers. Skooma smugglers haunt its outskirts. Redwater Den is therefore the natural extension of the Rift's character. It is the province's corruption distilled into one cursed place. Redwater Den is more than a dungeon. It is a mirror of the darkest truths about Skyrim, the weakness of mortals, the cruelty of predators, and the failure of society to protect its own. It is a place that thrives on suffering, where the walls themselves seem to whisper of despair. Its curse is not one that can be lifted by slaying a single vampire or looting a single chest. It is a curse woven into the fabric of Skyrim itself, into the endless cycle of addiction, exploitation, and silence. The most sinister place in Skyrim is not a forgotten ruin or a Daedric shrine. It is Redwater Den, where every bottle of skooma is a chain, every addict is a victim, and every shadow a predator waiting to strike. In Skyrim, danger usually comes with warning. There are caves that reek of death, dungeons humming with enemies, crypts soaked in soul energy, places that tell you right away something is wrong. But Half Moon Mill doesn't. From a distance, it looks normal. A modest wooden mill on the banks of Lake Ilinalta, southeast of Falkreath, surrounded by trees, lit by moonlight, and home to two friendly residents, Hurt and Hearn. They offer you work, they sell firewood, make small talk. But stay longer than just a few minutes and something changes. The music doesn't shift, there's no jump scare, but the feeling does kind of settle in. Something's wrong here, and no one in Skyrim seems to care. Half Moon Mill sits isolated, far from major roads and trading posts. Unlike other mills in Skyrim, like Mixwater, there's no bustling family, no delivery routes, no economic link to a nearby hold, other than Falkreath and Riverwood, which they are suppliers of. But other than that, it's just Hurt and Hearn. No wagons, no guards, no traffic. The mill turns quietly. The wheel rotates through stagnant water. Piles of lumber wait beside a chopping block that never seems to be used. And if you stop and think for even a moment, the first mystery hits. Who is this mill even for, other than Riverwood and Falkreath? If you visit the mill at night, Hurt is often awake, and so is Hearn, for that matter. You'd think that's quite normal. They're millers, after all, hard workers. They'd be doing jobs day in and day out. But no matter what time you arrive, they're alert, eyes clear, unbothered by the cold or the hour. Ask them what they do and their answers are strangely flat. You only get 2 dialogue prompts, and they smile, say they work at the mill, say it's quiet, but they like it that way. Their tone never shifts, they never get any other dialogue responses. Their eyes never flinch, and if you're paying attention, you'll notice they never eat, never sleep, and never leave. They're just always there, waiting for something or someone to come. Hurt and Hearn are vampires, not suspected, not implied, but now confirmed. If you have the Dawnguard DLC, a radiant quest from the vampire hunters may send you to kill one of them. They aren't hiding in a ruin, they're just operating at the lumber mill on the shore of a quiet lake. And Skyrim lets them. They're not hostile, they don't attack unless provoked like any other Skyrim NPC. They don't even flinch when you walk in, armed and curious. They just say something along the lines of, "Do you need any help?" It's not that they're pretending, it's that they don't really need to. Half Moon Mill is their lair, and everyone nearby seems to accept that. Or they just don't really know what's going on. Hurt and Hearn are the only 2 occupants of this mill. No hired workers, no children, and not many visitors, as they both said themselves. Even Morthal, just up the road, doesn't acknowledge them. There are no quests linking Hurt or Hearn to the city, no rumours and no accusations. Falkreath hold guards don't even mention them, even though they're the suppliers of that hold. No one seems to ask where they got their food, or why the mill keeps running when no one orders lumber. And that silence feels kind of deliberate. Like the world has quietly agreed, don't talk about the mill, because it's just easier that way. Half Moon Mill is nestled into the northern edge of Lake Illinolta, one of the most lore-rich and eerie locations in the game, as I've already talked about in other videos. To its west lies the Illinolta's Deep, a sunken fortress filled with necromancers and ruined halls. And with these things that happen at Illinolta, it doesn't really just hide the ruins, does it? It hides memories, and the mill also feels like one of those memories. Like something that's still functioning long after it should have been stopped. And when you go and look at the mill itself, you realise something. Nothing ever happens at the mill anyway. Inside Hurt and Hearn's home, everything does look quite normal. Or as normal as a Skyrim NPC house would get. A fire burns, chairs are placed neatly around a table, there's food laid out. And when I say there's food laid out, there's food everywhere. But they never touch it. You can sleep in their bed, use their chopping block, talk to them like they're regular townsfolk. And yet nothing in the house feels used. It's like a staged set, built to look lived in. But there's no life here, only the performance of it. And I guess when you're both vampires, you don't really need a house, do you? You can just go out and probably kill some random traveller on the side of a road. So Skyrim fans have long speculated on Half Moon Mill's purpose. One theory is that it's a feeding trap. Hurt and Hearn may be using the mill to attract travellers like myself, especially low-level adventurers or traders, for feeding. Their friendliness lures you in, their remoteness ensures no one sees you go missing. Now, this is probably true, because once you go and look at the mill, there's a shed not too far from it. And in that shed, there are a bunch of bones and human flesh and beef everywhere mixed with blood. Now, I'm not the only one who probably thinks these are missing travellers that Hurt and Hearn have been feeding on. And I suppose Skyrim probably isn't going to tell us anytime soon. Another theory is they were allowed to stay. Some believe Falkreath's leadership is aware of them and tolerates them even though they're vampires. Maybe they provide services in exchange for secrecy, as in if the Falkreath hold was to put an end to Hurt and Hearn, they would not be able to get any more lumber. And maybe they've agreed to only feed on outsiders. We really don't know. But as any Bethesda game and Elder Scrolls game, you can't go without a theory where it's just cut content. Some think Half Moon Mill was once part of a larger questline, perhaps related to the Dark Brotherhood or vampire factions, that was cut late in development. But the lack of answers is part of what makes the place feel so wrong. If you stand outside the house for long enough, you'll hear it. The creak of the mill wheel, it never stops. No matter the weather, no matter the time, no matter that there's no one collecting lumber, no carts and no deliveries. It turns over and over again, like it's grinding something you really can't see. And maybe that's the real question. Not what the mill is for, but what it's doing when no one's looking. Because I know not a lot of people go there, and that's been confirmed by Hurt and Hearn themselves. So what's really happening when it's just those two at the mill? You can kill Hurt and Hearn if you're sent on a Dawn Guard Radiant quest, or if you simply decide to test your suspicions. You can attack them. They'll fight back, they are pretty strong. Hurt in particular can surprise low-level players with her use of vampire drain spells. But if you win, nothing really happens. No one mentions it, no bounty is posted, no courier arrives, and no townsfolk react. The world goes on, and the mill just sits empty, or emptier than it was before. And after a few days, Hurt or Hearn is replaced by another random vampire, no story, and no explanation. Just kind of maintenance. Like someone somewhere needs the mill to be occupied, even though nothing is happening there. You leave the mill. You go back to the road, back to the story, back to the dragons and the quests and the prophecies all at once. And yet, something in you kind of lingers, or it did with me. You remember the house that didn't really feel real, the people who didn't blink, the wheel that never stopped running. You remember Hurt's voice, calm and detached even though she's hiding a crazy secret. You remember Hearn standing still in the doorway. And then you realise, in a world built to be explored, some places exist not to be conquered or looted, but to remind you that not everything is meant to be understood. And there's a lot of places in Skyrim that's like that, because some horrors don't really shout. Some just kind of sit there, smiling. That's what makes Half Moon Mill so inexplicably weird, the lack of shouting. Some places in Skyrim feel ancient, others feel cursed. Some feel like they were built on stories, tombs with legends etched in the stone, ruins full of screams and history. But then there are other places that feel wrong, not cursed, not haunted, just off. You walk into them and you feel the air shift, like something is watching, but not from above, not from the sky or some tower, but from the roots, from the soil, from the trees that creak just a little too much. Witchmist Grove is one of those places. It's not marked by grandeur, no NPCs whisper about it in the taverns. You don't go there unless the game really drags you. The trees are still, the shack is open, the stakes were already in the ground. And something about it feels like a scene that's already played out. You weren't meant to interrupt it. Just witness it, and try to leave unchanged. Witch Mist Grove is a small, unassuming patch of land tucked in Eastmarch, south of Kynes Grove and east of the Sulphur Springs. If you're playing normally, you won't think twice about it, until you stumble upon it during the quest A Night to Remember. A drunken misadventure involving a staff, a hangover, and a woman named Moira. The setup is comedic. You black out, wake up hungover, and begin retracing your steps. And one of those steps leads you here, to a shack hidden in a grove, surrounded by wooden stakes and birdsong. And then you meet her. She's not a woman, she's a hag raven, a twisted, feathered monstrosity, half witch, half bird, clawed and shrieking. And she believes that you're her fiancé. She fights you, you kill her, you take her ring, and that's about it. The game laughs, you laugh maybe, but Witch Mist Grove stays with you. For a really weird reason. Before A Night to Remember activates, Witch Mist Grove is occupied by a random witch or hag. The area seems like a minor encounter space, one of those locations scattered across Skyrim that gives the world texture. But once the quest begins, the location changes. Moira replaces the generic NPC, the interior becomes specific, and suddenly the tone shifts. The shack has no door, the floor is covered in blood, skeever heads and goat skulls lie broken near barrels. Hag raven feathers are tucked beneath the stairs, a single usable bed sits in the corner, surrounded by bones and flies. It's like a place where no one should live. And yet, Moira calls it her home. She calls you her lover, and there's something about that chills more than any drag or crypt. She's not a boss, not a threat, she's someone who thought you'd return, who still wants you too. There's a temptation to write Witch Mist Grove off as a punchline. The entire A Night to Remember quest is comedic, inspired by The Hangover. It lets you experience a ridiculous drunken night you don't remember, a goat trade, a temple trashing, a stolen ring. But Moira isn't funny. Her dialogue isn't just mad, it's familiar. She doesn't scream, curses, or summon storms. She pleads. She acts like a jilted lover, a wronged fiancé. Her aggression feels more like heartbreak than villainy. And that makes the joke darker. Because Witch Mist Grove, her home, isn't staged like a trap. It's staged like someone was waiting. There's no ambush, no minions, just a shack, a ring, and a letter you'll never find. Let's talk about architecture. Witch Mist Grove is one of the only player-accessible buildings in the game without a functioning door. You walk through a broken archway and you're immediately in her space. There's no loading screens, no barrier, just entry. It feels like the house is already open, already waiting. You're not intruding, you're expected. It's a small detail, but an important one. Doors in Skyrim are transitions between safety and danger, and between zones. The lack of one here makes the entire area feel exposed, raw, and vulnerable. You're in someone's home and they know it, and they've always known it. Hag ravens appear throughout Skyrim, usually as monstrous mini-bosses in Forsworn camps or alchemical rituals. But very little is known about how they live or how they became who they are. They're women who sacrifice their humanity for power, often associated with dark covens and natural rituals. Hag ravens are deeply tied to primal feminine magic. In many cultures in Tamriel, they're whispered about, but not studied. And yet Moira shows something rarely seen in her kind: attachment. She made a home, she made plans, she believed in a future. And even if it's a glitch, a gag, a side quest quirk, Witch Mist Grove becomes something else in that light. A love story. But one where the lover is a hag raven and the home is a shrine of bones. Skyrim excels at dungeon design. Tombs echo, Falmer caves drip with menace, Dwemer ruins hum with forgotten machinery. But Witch Mist Grove is different. It's not grand, it's not deep, it's not hidden. It's just a house, one you can walk into at level 1. And that might make it even scarier. Witch Mist Grove doesn't operate on combat tension, it operates on emotional dissonance. It feels like someone built it with love, or the Haggraven equivalent of it. The blood isn't meant to scare you, it's just there, part of the environment. Like this is normal. And maybe to Moira, it was. Let's talk details. There are 7 Haggraven feathers scattered under the steps. There's a destruction skill book by the bed. There's an unlocked chest, but the loot is minor. There are creep clusters, jazzbay grapes, and dragon's tongue flowers growing around the grove. Ingredients often associated with alchemy and magic. Everything here feels ritualistic, but no ritual is ever shown. That's what's so eerie about it, because usually in Skyrim, when you see a witch's lair, the spell circle is still glowing, the enemies are still chanting, the ritual is in progress. But Witchmist Grove? It's an afterthought. The fire's gone out, the bones are cold, you're not seeing a ritual, you're seeing the memory of one. One of Skyrim's best tricks is making you feel like the world exists without you. But in this place, it goes further. It makes you feel like you missed something important. Like you arrived just a little too late or a little too early. You can't talk to Moira, you can't ask her why she thought you'd marry her. You can't ask if she made that ring herself. The quest doesn't care. The game moves on, but you don't. You leave the grove. The blood stays. The feathers stay, the air stays thick and silent. You wonder how long she has been waiting, and what she would have done if you had have said yes. There's a tone in Witchmist Grove that's hard to name. Not horror, not tragedy. It's a kind of off-killer sorrow, like a joke told too late at a funeral. You're supposed to laugh, but the timing was wrong. The entire A Night to Remember quest plays for laughs, and for most of it, it works. The goat trade, the cult, the temple destruction, it's absurdity at its best. But Moira doesn't really feel like the punchline. She feels like someone else's story that bled into yours. And Witchmist Grove is the proof that she had one. You can visit Witchmist Grove before the quest. You can visit it after. Moira will be gone, the shack will still stand. The blood doesn't clean itself up, the skulls don't despawn, the house remains open. And empty. Most players never return. And why would they? There's nothing to loot really, no quest to complete after, no dialogue to finish. But for those who do, those who take the long way down the ridge from Kyne's Grove, those who step inside again after the laughter's gone, they'll find something else. Not treasure, not danger, just a space. Quiet, cracked, and waiting. Because sometimes the most chilling places in Skyrim aren't the ones full of death. They're the ones that were waiting for life, but never got it. To understand why Wolfskull Cave is so disturbing, one must first understand the figure whose legacy it preserves. Potema Septim, the Wolf Queen. Potema was not merely an evil ruler. She was a force of nature, a storm in human form. The daughter of Pelagius II and the aunt of the Emperor Uriel Septim III. She manipulated the very empire from within, sowing chaos in pursuit of power. Her reign of influence was one of deceit, war, and black sorcery. Even in death, her name lingered like a curse, whispered through the catacombs of solitude. The legends say she could speak to the dead. Others claim she fed on their souls. When she finally died, her body was entombed deep beneath solitude. But her spirit, her will, refused to fade. Centuries later, necromancers sought to bring her back, choosing Wolfskull Cave as the place of her resurrection. The choice was deliberate. This cave, carved into the bones of an ancient hill, feels alive. The walls breathe, the air hums with magic, and every echo sounds like a whisper. It's a place where death never truly rests. What makes Wolfskull Cave so unsettling isn't what happens inside, it's where it is. The cave sits just west of Solitude, the capital of Skyrim, a city ruled by imperial authority, guarded by soldiers and seen as a beacon of order and civilization. Yet mere minutes from its gates lies a pit of blasphemy, a necromantic cult openly conducting rituals to resurrect a centuries-old queen of evil. The proximity is disturbing. It suggests that darkness in Skyrim is not distant. It thrives right under the noses of the powerful. While nobles feast in the Blue Palace and merchants trade in Solitude Square, the dead are being awakened in the hills nearby. It's this contrast between civilization and corruption that makes Wolfskull Cave so haunting. It's not just a place of danger, it's a reminder that Skyrim's peace is fragile, its light barely holding back the shadows. When the Dragonborn enters Wolfskull Cave during the quest The Man Who Cried Wolf, they find something few players forget. Deep inside, a massive cavern opens, a chasm lit by blue magical fire. Necromancers stand on platforms carved from stone, chanting in unison, their voices weaving through the air like smoke. Lightning crackles, bones rattle, and in the center, above a pit of spectral energy, a ghostly figure begins to form. "Return, O Wolf Queen, return to us," they cry. This is the summoning of Potema, a ritual of resurrection so powerful it shakes the very cave itself. The player witnesses the spectral outline of her spirit, clawing her way back toward the mortal realm, her laugh echoing across the stone walls. Even when the Dragonborn disrupts the ritual, it's too late. The ritual succeeds partially. Potema returns as a restless spirit, her essence scattered across the crypts of solitude. Unlike many of Skyrim's caves, Wolfskull Cave feels deliberate. It's not a mine nor a natural tunnel system. It does feel built, as though someone long ago carved it out with intention. The stone is unnaturally smooth in places, and certain chambers bear the marks of old rituals. Torches flicker blue, chains hang from the ceiling, ancient runes faintly glow when light passes over them. It's unclear whether the necromancers chose this cave for its seclusion or because it was already tainted. Some believe it was once a temple to Daedric forces, possibly Molag Bal or Namira. Others think Potema herself may have used it during her lifetime as a site of dark experiments. Whatever the truth, its architecture tells a story. This place was meant for worship, for sacrifice, and for secrecy. The deeper you go, the more it feels like the mountain itself wants to swallow you whole. Wolfskull Cave is filled with sound, whispers, wind, the hum of necromantic energy. But there's something else, something quieter, yet more disturbing. Presence. When walking through its corridors, players often describe feeling watched. The shadows seem thicker than they should ever be. The chanting doesn't always stop when you defeat the necromancers. Sometimes, even after the ritual ends, faint echoes of her laughter can still be heard. This isn't imagination, it's environmental storytelling. The designers of Skyrim created Wolfskull Cave to feel haunted. Even without ghosts or monsters, the atmosphere alone creates unease. The lighting is pale and sickly, the geometry is claustrophobic, funneling you ever downward. The air is filled with faint dust motes like ash. It's as if the cave itself resents your presence, as though you are trespassing in a sacred tomb that wants to remain undisturbed. Although the player stops the initial summoning in The Man Who Cried Wolf, Potema's resurrection cannot be undone. Later, during the quest The Wolf Queen Awakened, you must enter her catacombs beneath Solitude to finish what the necromancers began, to destroy what they revived. This narrative thread, however, always leads back to Wolfskull Cave. It's where it started. It's where the boundary between life and death was first perceived. What's chilling is that even though you cleanse Solitude of Potema's influence, Wolfskull Cave remains. The necromancers may be dead, but the energy lingers. The torches still burn. The cave never resets to normal wildlife like other dungeons. It remains forever marked as though the ritual carved a scar into the land itself. Wolfskull Cave is no longer just a location. It's a symptom of something deeper, Skyrim's inability to let go of its past. Why Wolfskull? The name itself carries weight. Wolves in Nordic mythology are creatures of death and inevitability. They represent the wild, the uncontainable, the devourer of the sun at the end of the world. To add skull to that image creates something doubly grim, a symbol of both savagery and mortality. The Wolf Queen herself embraced that symbol. Her followers often referred to her as the wolf among the sheep, the devourer of kings. In resurrecting her, the necromancers sought to awaken not just her power, but her spirit and her hunger. Thus, Wolfskull Cave becomes a shrine not just to Pottermore, but to the concept of corruption itself. It's where the civilized world's mask slips, revealing the beast beneath. What truly makes Wolfskull Cave disturbing is not just its lore, but its psychological weight. It's not filled with jump scares or overwhelming enemies. It's filled with implication. Everything about it suggests desecration. The bones piled high, the blood-stained altars, the ritual chambers echoing with phantom chants. Even when empty, the place feels alive, as though the walls remember the horrors committed within them. Skyrim has many dangerous dungeons, but few feel as morally wrong as Wolfskull Cave. Here, death isn't just an accident of war or survival, a deliberate perversion of the natural order. That makes it one of the most disturbing locations in all of Skyrim, not because of monsters, but because of human evil. Wolfskull Cave stands as one of Skyrim's most disturbing locations because it's not about what's alive, it's about what refuses to stay dead. Pottermore's laughter may have faded, her bones may have crumbled, but her spirit lingers in the darkness. The cave remains silent and waiting, like a wound that never quite closes. Skyrim is full of monsters, bandits and beasts, but only in Wolfskull Cave does evil feel so human. And that is what makes it truly terrifying. Wolfskull Cave is not just a place of death. It's a reminder that in Skyrim, some nightmares don't end, they endure. What makes an NPC truly disturbing and cursed in Skyrim usually isn't how powerful they are, or how many people they've killed. It's the feeling they leave behind once you start looking past the surface. Because Skyrim is full of characters who seem normal at first. They live in towns, work ordinary jobs, stand in crowded cities, surrounded by people who barely question them. And that's what makes the disturbing ones stand out so much. The horror doesn't come from obvious monsters hiding in caves. It comes from realizing how much darkness can exist quietly within everyday life in Skyrim. Some NPCs are disturbing because of what they've done, others because of what they actually become in the end. And some are unsettling simply because the game never fully explains them, leaving you to piece together fragments and implications on your own. Rumours, journals, strange dialogue, hidden behaviours, tiny details that slowly build into something far worse the longer you think about them. That's the key thing. The most cursed NPCs in Skyrim usually aren't loud about what they are. They're subtle, controlled, integrated into the world so naturally that most players walk right past them without realising how disturbing they actually are. And once you do notice it, it changes how you look at the game itself. You stop trusting appearances, you start paying close attention to dialogue, to environments, to the stories hidden underneath casual conversations. Because Skyrim constantly hides disturbing people in places that should feel safe, inside cities, courts, homes, villages. And that creates a very different kind of horror than dragons or monsters ever could. Because it feels close, human, possible. That's why these NPCs stick with people long after the quests end. Not because they're the biggest villains in Skyrim, but because they reveal how dark the world can become without anyone around them even noticing.